All right, everybody, welcome back. Ready for another deep dive.
Always.
Awesome. It's funny how we can have two people making the same amount of money, but end up in totally different places financially, right?
Yeah. It really makes you think.
Big time. And you know what? One of our listeners actually sent us a really cool article about exactly that. It's about how two people with the same income can end up rich or totally broke, and it's got some really fascinating stuff in it. Like, we're talking common money mistakes people make, the habits of actual millionaires, and even the science behind why we spend the way we do.
This whole thing is a bit of a head scratcher, isn't it? I mean, economists and financial folks have been trying to figure this out forever.
Totally. And this article dives right in. It
Yeah.
talks about this thing called lifestyle inflation. I got to admit, that one hit me right between the eyes.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. To give this example, right, people feel like they got to buy all this fancy stuff, luxury items, just to look rich. Have you ever felt that? Like the pressure to spend just to keep up with everybody else?
Huh. Oh, absolutely. It's a huge thing, this whole social pressure. There's this book, a classic you've probably heard of, The Millionaire Next Door.
Oh, yeah, yeah, I've heard of that one.
Well, it totally debunks this idea that millionaires are all about the bling. They actually found a lot of millionaires are super frugal. They'd rather save and invest than show off. They had this one story really stuck with me about this millionaire driving around in a beat-up old car and clipping coupons. His neighbors were totally shocked. They thought he was living the high life.
That's hilarious. I love it. It really shows you can't judge a book by its cover, especially when it comes to money, right?
Right.
And speaking of things that could be more expensive than they seem, the article then goes on to this whole thing about excessive debt. And wow, the numbers are scary. Like, picture this, $5,000 in credit card debt at a 20% interest rate.
Oof.
Yeah, that's $500 a month, just in interest. It's crazy how fast debt can get out of control.
Makes you think about all the things you could be doing with that money, doesn't it? It's all about opportunity cost. Basically, what you could be gaining if you chose a different path with your money, like that $500 a month. If you invested that for 30 years, even in something super basic, you could easily end up with like over $60,000 thanks to compounding.
Wow, that's a huge difference. Instead of being stuck in debt,
Mm.
you could have a nice little nest egg just from making different choices.
Yeah,
Makes you think, right?
exactly.
The article also brings up this thing about lack of tracking and budgeting
Mm.
as like a recipe for financial disaster. They use this example I think we can all relate to.
Yeah, what's that?
They're talking about buying a sandwich every day for lunch. Seems harmless enough, right?
Yeah, who doesn't love a good sandwich?
Exactly. But if you don't keep track, those little sandwich expenses can add up big time. We've all been there, am I right?
Definitely. And you know what's interesting? The article talked about some of the science behind this. Apparently, when we use credit cards, it triggers the reward centers in our brains.
Really, like a little dopamine hit.
Yeah, basically. So we end up not being as aware of how much we're spending compared to when we use cash. It's like our brain doesn't register it the same way when we just swipe a card.
Wow, that's wild. It's like our own brains are working against us when it comes to money.
Sometimes it feels that way.
But, okay, let's switch gears for a second. What about the good stuff? The habits that can help us build wealth?
Yeah, for sure. So one that really jumps out is investing early. They have this great example in the article about two guys, Humphrey and Graham. Humphrey starts investing when he's just 20 years old, but he only puts in a little bit. Then you've got Graham, who waits till he's 30, but he invests a much larger amount. You know what?
What?
By the time they both retire, Humphrey, the guy who started early, has way more money. All because of that compound interest magic working over time.
See, that's what I'm talking about. It's like that saying, time in the market beats time in the market, right? You don't need to be a Wall Street wizard or anything. Just start early. I like to think of it like planting a tree.
Yeah.
You know, the sooner you plant it, the bigger and stronger it'll grow.
Makes sense.
Okay, but what about those of us who, maybe didn't start investing in our early 20s? What can we do now to catch up?
Well, the article talks about this other habit called paying yourself first, which can make a huge difference no matter how old you are.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that.
It's really simple, really. You just set aside a percentage of your income for savings or investments before you spend anything else. Like right off the bat, put $250 from each paycheck straight into your investment account, no questions asked.
Love that. It's like making your future self a priority. Make saving feel less like a chore and more like just part of your
Right,
routine.
exactly.
Okay, so the article also goes into this idea of focusing on assets over liabilities. They break it down like this. Assets are things that actually make you money, like stocks, real estate, even owning a business. Liabilities are the things that drain your money, like that new car or a bunch of credit card debt.
Yeah, that's a super important distinction. Do you want to know what I think it all comes down to?
I'm all ears.
It's about understanding the difference between things that put money in your pocket and things that take it out. Building wealth is all about putting your energy into getting those assets, whether that's investing in the stock market or starting a little side hustle to bring in some extra cash.
Love it. So after all this talk about money and habits and psychology, what would you say are the biggest takeaways from this deep dive?
For me, it all boils down to mindset. It's not about how much money you've got coming in, it's about what you do with it. Even small changes in your spending, coupled with some smart investing and a focus on building assets, can add up to something really big over time.
And you know what else? The article gives some really practical tips too, like using budgeting apps or
Mhm.
even just a simple spreadsheet to keep track of where your money's going. They even have a free template to get you started.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
don't forget about what we were talking about earlier, the psychology of spending. Remember how using credit cards can make us spend more without realizing it?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
If we're more aware of that, we can make smarter choices, right?
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
So to wrap this all up, I want to leave you with something to think about. Remember how we talked about assets versus liabilities? Take a minute and think, how could you maybe shift some of your spending or saving to focus on building those assets? It's a question worth pondering. And remember, even little changes like maybe skipping that daily sandwich can make a big difference for your future financial self. Thanks so much for joining us for another deep dive, everyone. It's been a blast.
Absolutely.
All right. See you next time.
See ya.